together. But Stephen, I do have a question for you regarding kind of your guys' approach to Tank 7. Have you guys, I know you guys do Saison bread as well. Have you guys found yourselves that as you experimenting within the Belgian Saison style, are you guys kind of beholden to Tank 7 where you can't move outside of that box too much, or do you guys still find ways to kind of reinvent that Saison approach?
You know, yeah, it's a difficult question. That yeast is so picky, and it's it's a ratio of esters, you know, the fruitiness and the phenols that's really tricky. So we've used that yeast for some smaller beers, but then the phenolic characteristics comes out too much, and it's just like, it's not really all that pleasant to drink. So we've talked about, why don't we make a tank 3.5 or whatever, you know? And we've tried, but it's just, you know, the whole balance, it doesn't work anymore. So yeah, I think we can take it down. We've tried to take it down, like see where it's still a good balance, and about 6, 7.5, it's still fine. But once you go to like 6, 6.5, it's like, it's not there anymore. So it's a whole play on, you know, the phenols and the phenolic characteristics and the esters. Yeah, but yeah, Saison bread, that's a good question, because that's really the mother beer of this beer. Not a lot of people know that. We made that beer because we were making Saison bread, and we made, you know, the base beer was so good, so that became Tank 7. But yeah, and Saison bread's gonna come out here in about a month or so.
Awesome.
God, that's one of my favorites of all time, man. Steve, do you mind if we ask how things are going out by you guys out in KC? How's with all the craziness going on? How's the crew at Boulevard holding up?
You know, we're doing okay. It's tough, and it's changing every day, and it's a rough world out there. I really I feel bad for a lot of people out right now, especially bars and restaurants, and we support them as much as we can. We're big time on premise also, so we sell a lot of beer on premise. So our sales are down, of course, but so far, I mean, we're doing okay. We can't complain. We can't complain.
That's great. Real quick, folks, if there are any specific questions for Stephen, go ahead and post them in the chat. I want to make sure just to bounce a couple of those off of him if possible. If you have a couple more minutes, Stephen, if you have time for a couple.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That'd be great. In the meantime, while a couple of those questions are feeding in there, just a real quick, if anyone was here for the Tasting 101 session with Patrick, just a couple of quick notes on getting the most out of your tasting session and the most out of tasting your beer. First, you're gonna, when you're looking to take that first sniff, it's not a big horkin inhale with your nose deep in the glass, especially with a higher octane beer like this. You're just gonna agitate the inside of your nose and just kind of burn it a little bit, and you're gonna inure it to any of the more delicate flavors that might come out. So you're just talking a quick little sniff, and that gets you everything that you need to know on the nose. You're not going to get any more information by inhaling the living bejesus out of it. Then as you're sipping, of course, you're of course trying to get an idea of what it is this tastes like, the esters and the phenol, so the fruitiness and the spiciness that's kind of behind each beer. And you're also looking not just for that taste as it's on your lips and on your tongue, but you're also looking for that retronasal thing. So after you swallow it, there's this kind of interaction between your taste buds and the back of your throat and your nasal passage and all that, where additional information about the beer can come out. And then at the end, of course, you're just kind of looking to see what the finish brings to you. So quick sniff, kind of roll things around a little bit, and then make sure to kind of be checking for both the finish, both retronasally, and then just how it kind of lingers on your tongue. One question here from Mimi and Bop from Neil's folks. Stephen, why is it called Tank 7, and why is this one 11? I'll kick the Tank 7 question to Stephen and the Tank 11 question to Neil.
The 7 is for our fermentation tank. Number 7 was a really odd tank. It had, I think, years before I came in, John McDonald bought this tank, and somebody talked him into like having this special design. And in the end, it was, excuse my French, pain in the ass tank. So we used it for all kinds of experiments and stuff. And that's where we make that beer, because we didn't really want to use that tank too much. So if we experimented, we used that tank. That's where that base beer for Saison bread was in. So that's that's why it became Tank 7. Our marketing people wanted to give it a different name, like Boat of the Plains or something like that. And I'm like, no way. It's going to be Tank 7, buddy. No way.
And then, ours went into FV4. So our fermenter 4 was where our clone went in. And so 7 + 4 = 11. And so it's kind of our homage to Stephen and all their work. If you guys have the can,
Yeah.
you guys see, Rachel, our designer, she did an amazing job just kind of bringing in some of the kind of iconic look of Tank 7 and just some of the elements, but also still feel like WeldWerks. So the Boulevard team was awesome to let us use some of that kind of likeness, and they approved that with their marketing team too. So Stephen, thank you guys so much for letting us make this beer.
Awesome.
I can speak just, it's awesome to have you on this call, but it's, I think there's a lot of people that have influenced me, but I can't think of anybody you're my biggest hero in the industry, just because, and we've known each other for a while too, which is really cool that, our back to the Brewers Retreat days 4 years ago. But for those that haven't had the privilege to meet Stephen, he's one of the few people in our industry he's more knowledgeable than anyone in the room, but he'll never act like it. And so he's so approachable. He's so down to earth, and he's so willing to learn. That's what I've really loved about, I glean something from you every time we talk, but it seems like you're always looking to learn either it's new styles. And so it's really fun that you're not just this kind of complacent, like, I've established myself, I've learned everything I need to know, I'll help share information, but you're still bringing on all sorts of new ideas. And you guys are making some of my favorite beers in the world in Kansas City. So it's a lot of fun. I really appreciate all of our collaborations and just our friendship too. So thank you for joining us for the call.
You got to stop, man. I'm going to start crying.
Me too. Do you want to tease any of the projects? Anything you've got coming up that you want to tease for Boulevard?
Well, we got this collaboration coming up with you. So it's 3-way collaboration with you guys in Side Project. And I think that came up. We were talking about Imperial Stouts and, 35 Plato and all that stuff. You remember that? And it's like, why don't we just make it a 40 Plato? And we failed. It was 39.6. So it's a fun beer. It's double barrel aged. It's massive. It's a great beer. I haven't sent you a bottle yet, have I?
Not yet. I was actually just going to ask.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's packaged, but our bottle line was not working very good. It's a big bottle, so we're going to label it this week, and then I'll send you a couple bottles.
That sounds awesome. So it'll hit the market in the next couple weeks, or?
I think June.
June. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Is that the biggest beer you guys have brewed on that system?
Yeah. It took 3 brewers to make the biggest beer.
Okay. I can't wait to try it.
Yeah, it's awesome. No, I love working with you guys. You guys are thinking outside the box, and I love it. I've been around for a long time, and it's great to, spend some time with you creative guys, and how you think about beer is somewhat different than what I think about it most of the time, and I've learned a lot from you. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's always a pleasure. So cheers to Tank 7 and Tank 11.
Cheers, guys.
Mutual Admiration Society in here, friends, and that's I've said it 100 times, and I've said it multiple times on this call, but I'll say it again. It is without question or reservation one of the best parts about working in this industry is that even though the competition isn't really a thing, it is all about collaboration and about bringing out the best in each other. And Stephen, you certainly do that for us without question. So everyone, and Stephen, please, if you want to still hang out and whatnot, and have your I think you have one of the beers that we're about to be drinking. So if you want to hang out for a little longer, feel free. I know that your time is valuable, so we understand if you need to go as well. But either way, cannot thank you enough for carving a little bit of time out of your day to come kind of hang out with us and have.
I think my wife was calling me, so I got to go. Sorry, guys.
Got you, man.
Thank
you, Stephen.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
Thank you, guys. Good luck. See you soon.
One and only Handsome Steve.
So that shit just tell you that just happened. Yeah, we thought it'd be funny. Just unfortunately, Turk, I didn't have it recording with the big unveil. So we started recording about 5 minutes in, but many thanks to Steve for coming to hang out. Neil, where are we heading next? Are we heading to Juicy Bits or?
Juicy Bits.
Rock and roll. So, this beer is as much a part of the story of WeldWerks as anything else. And there are a lot of questions. FYI, we did see all the questions about hop varietals, a whole bunch about New England IPAs. Unless you want to address those in the context of going over this and advanced fluid dynamics, we can push those off as a chunk later on if you just kind of want to go through the ins and outs of Juicy Bits itself and advanced fluid. But I leave that up to you.
Sure. I'll just kick it off with kind of, I'm sure most people are familiar with at least the recipe. There's 2 homebrew versions, but like Jake mentioned, this has become our flagship. It's pretty much our only flagship. We brew Hefeweizen year-round currently, but nothing at all remotely to the volume or scope that we do with Juicy Bits. And this is essentially the only beer you can guarantee to find in draft and package at WeldWerks and our distribution footprint year-round. So other than that, everything is rotational, but Juicy Bits is kind of that, kind of back to zero. It's that calibration. It's the recentering. It's kind of iconic because it really defined how we've changed in the last 5 years, especially when this beer was released at our 1-year anniversary. But for anybody that's not had Juicy Bits or at least not recently, it's still the exact same 1-to-1-to-1 Citra, Mosaic, Eldorado. And we keep that ratio the same from the hot side Whirlpool editions we do, the dry hopping throughout the entire length of this brew. Everything is even parts of all 3 of those hops. And honestly, the reason we landed on those 3 is we knew obviously Citra. So this is like 5 years ago when we were working on the recipe, a little bit less than that. But when we started looking at what hop contracts we could get, Citra was one of the hardest. Mosaic was a bit easier, and Eldorado, nobody was contracting. It was a newer varietal that wasn't getting a lot of traction. And so honestly, a lot of the reasons we landed on those is because we knew we wanted Citra. Mosaic was definitely kind of high in the runnings with some others like Galaxy, but we couldn't get that. A few like Amarillo that we loved, but didn't love every single lot we used. So we had some kind of hit or miss lots of Amarillo and some other kind of mid-range contemporary, not all the way as new as Citra Mosaic. And Eldorado was a price point. I was looking at the catalog, and it was the most affordable fruit-forward varietal that I could find, and I knew I could contract. And it turns out that the Eldorado has been the surprise hit for this 3 for the last couple of years because our lot selections for hop selection have been so great. Our Eldorado lots I would put up there with some of the best Citra and Mosaic we've used. We love all 3, so that's kind of what this beer represents is all 3 of those varietals in the exact same ratio, and they all play a different role. So what we wanted, and it's really cool to go to Yakima now and select for these flavors, but what we're looking for is this fruit juice in a can with no fruit. It's the most fruit-forward expression of hops that we could create, and everything we do around the recipe is for that purpose. So it's the lower bitterness, it's even the malt selection, the fermentation profile, the yeast we use, all of that is all driven around the idea of creating this kind of really fruit-forward, tropical, citrus, and even stone fruit expressive beer. So what the Citra does is kind of pushes that citrus fruit, grapefruit, tangerine, especially more on the like tangerine side of sweet Valencia orange peel juice. That's what the Citra is bringing. The pineapple is coming from that Mosaic, so that tropical fruit is what we're looking for in our Mosaic lots. And then Eldorado is going into that mango, some of the papaya, and even some kind of guava notes. So it's all of those 3 varietals together bring this just really fun kind of fruit-forward IPA. My favorite, but it doesn't happen as much anymore because I think the Hazy IPA blip on the radar that everyone thought was going to go away. It's obviously not going away. But we used to have all the question every time was, what fruit is in this beer? What fruit juices, what fruit do you add? And none of that was we did fruity bits for a bit, but we never did anything with juicy bits. It was always just the fruit expression from the hops. So that's juicy bits. And like Jake mentioned, certainly don't feel pressured to drink these now too. If you want to save them, we're recording this, right, Jake?
Yes, we are now.
Yeah, perfect. So at least while we're drinking, but we're recording this. So if you want to drink one now, listen to the rest later. It's not necessarily a guiding through all these. It's more of anecdotal, a little bit of history, and a little bit of how we brew it. This is a really fun one too, because we do have this recipe. So if you guys have brewed this at home, if you're on the video, give me just a thumbs up if you've brewed a clone of Juicy Bits at home. A couple? Sweet. So yeah, it's really fun to hear about people who've brewed it. Nothing's really changed. Our process gets better just by fine-tuning some things we have with equipment and DOs. So I'll speak to DO real quick, Jake, if that's all right. I think I saw that on the...
There's a few related questions, but yeah, I mean, if you want to dive into DO, there's others, a couple others related to Juicy Bits that we can touch on as well.
Yeah, do you have one? If you have one queued up.
Yeah, a couple that I think are super important to some of the history of it. One from Roberto, the brewery or breweries that served as inspiration for Juicy Bits, and I know that was a pretty significant process for, and that was even before I was around. That was like you and Adam and I think Nick Armitage and all those cats going through all those beers. So if you want to speak a little bit, like, well, shit, maybe we should make one of these things.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Adam, good friend of mine, and he's worked in our tap room since we opened. And Jamie,
for those who don't know.
And then Jamie Bogner at Craft Beer and Brewing, those two guys in particular were there was a lot of people that were saying we should make a hazy IPA, but those two were the loudest and most incessant. And so I finally caved. But before I did that, I didn't cave because I didn't want to. I just didn't know much about it. I hadn't, beyond, probably Heady Topper. After Heady Topper and a couple of the Vermont styles, I hadn't really had a lot of exposure to what was happening in Massachusetts, 5-6 years ago, with specifically Treehouse and Trillium. I had heard of them, but I had really not tried those beers. So at the end of 2015, when we were kind of talking about making our own hazy, we spent as much time acquiring as many examples of the styles we could, not just those two, but all over the country. There have obviously been a lot of breweries that have taken up the mantle and we're brewing what I think is kind of more of a Massachusetts-driven New England IPA than just the Vermont. It's kind of the distinction I have. But Vermont was definitely the first kind of foray into what we all know as New England now. And I think the Massachusetts crew in particular kind of took it that next step. And I think that's what we see the most represented now is kind of that, what JC's doing at Trillium and what Nate was doing at Treehouse. Those expressions now have kind of, I think, been adopted. A lot of the turbidity, the softer bitterness, mouthfeel, all of those things I think that are so iconic for what we all call New England now. So I would say if I had to pick two breweries that were most influential on Juicy Bits, it would probably be Treehouse and Trillium, and really Trillium in particular, just how many of across their entire lineup, it was just every single time I had something, it was remarkable at how great it was. And I kept wanting, I know JC better now, but I wanted to hate him at the time because I just don't understand how is every single IPA I tried from them so well executed. It was crazy to see it that even 6 years ago, and today they've gotten even better, but they weren't putting out anything that wasn't completely, perfectly crafted and well balanced. That's the other thing that I loved about it. There's, the balance of these beers can be really heavy and thick sometimes. And so that's, I think, where we drew inspiration was from what Trillium does, which is moderately well attenuated, kind of moderate bitterness and really bright hop character.
And, I linger on it for just someone unmute themselves. Okay, cool. Let's take it. Please, friends, if you can. Otherwise, stuff gets super loud and echoey. I want to linger on the point for just a minute. Because if you remember in the early days, so I came on board literally like my anniversary is essentially when, or my start date is basically when Juicy Bits was released, and the intervening months was constantly having everyone try all of these other beers, right? Like Green and Lush and every single kind that we could try. The reason for that being is that we were taking a lot of heat essentially for trying to push this beer at a time when it really wasn't favorable in the public eye at that point. We weren't the first to bring it to the state, of course. Fiction, I think, was out there first. Odd was definitely out there first. I think even Sean had his hazy out there first. They were, it was relatively close together, but we definitely weren't the first to the scene. But we were some of the first to feel the heat of people being like, "This isn't beer. This isn't an IPA. How dare you, sir? How dare you make something like this, you absolutely insane person?" And so, what was that process like for you as someone who's just trying to bring what you feel is a cool product to the market, while also, because you were dealing with a lot of the social media stuff at that time as well. How did that work? Like, I know that I have something cool here that people are really going to like if they would just give it a chance, man. And so what was that dichotomy and that struggle kind of like going through?
It wasn't fun. I think I've not dove back into social media much more personally. As not just that, there was obviously the infection issues we had with Medianoche. But between all that, it was like at some point I just didn't have the energy to fight anymore. I remember some of our bigger Colorado forums, beer forums, just trying, I mean, this is 4 years ago or so, trying to advocate for the style, and it was just tiring. And it wasn't even really like enthusiasts or craft beer consumers as much as it was other brewers. That was the most taxing part, was 90% of the breweries that were chiming in, like whether it was a brewer or an owner or a sales rep or somebody else from a brewery, was just so critical of a style that they didn't understand. It was clear that they either had really bad examples or they just never tried it, and they were making these assumptions based on appearance. And I understand it's a huge paradigm shift for anybody, especially Steven and I have had those conversations about, we did our hazy IPA with them 2 or 3 years ago. And it was a shift to even get them to think about it differently, just because they're so trained on how to make a really clean, crisp, classic style that things like appearance are such a big component. And so I think that got very tiring. But I'm glad we fought those fights, and I'm glad we advocated for the style. I'm glad we advocated for the style guidelines or for the style to be added to the GABF guidelines for World Beer Cup. In the next one, I guess we won't have one this time, but it was there, so it was going to happen. There was 4 hazy IPA categories again, and so all those things, I'm proud of our team for doing that. I'm proud for what we've done. Not in our realm. Not that we've, like you said, we weren't the first to market in Colorado. Certainly weren't really pushing it. We didn't reinvent anything, but in our own kind of way, we brought something new. We brought a perspective, and we brought some advocacy that's helped to legitimize. It was really fun yesterday doing the Craft Brewers Guild kind of beer day, being on the call with Dave Thibodeau and talking IPA, and it was awesome. Like, it was a career highlight for me to talk IPA with him, knowing a few 6-7 years ago, sitting in on a Big Beers panel with him and Doug Odell and Todd at Breckenridge, and they're talking IPAs. And Modus is by far one of my favorite Colorado IPAs, and then to hear him talk about their hazy IPA and how our team influenced them and the creation of that. And it's just cool to see we've made so much more progress on the style being not necessarily adopted by everyone, but at least appreciated and understood better.
Awesome. Another, I think a question that's really interesting that kind of straddles both the line of Juicy Bits itself and also kind of getting in. Are you thinking we go to advanced fluid next? Probably. I
was thinking maybe we go fruit next and end with hops.
Okay, that's great. But the question still stands from Ryan. Does contracting play a lot in hop selection when creating a style for commercial production? So how much are we taking into account just what we have on order? Obviously, this is a way different story for us now because we're lucky enough to be able to go out for hop selection to Yakima and would have been to New Zealand if this virus hadn't hit us. But it plays a little bit differently because we have a bit more, ability to be picky and choosy with some of that. But both with Juicy Bits and kind of moving forward to some of those earlier days before we had that flexibility, how much did those hop contracts of these sexy hops kind of come into play when deciding what to brew and what to hold off from?
It was a huge driver, especially with steam barrel to start. We were really limited on what we could get access to, and I thought we made a really great IPA at the time, but we didn't have access to all the hops we wanted, and so it was kind of like we were playing with our hands tied behind our back. We weren't unleashed to do what we could with hop expression until we started securing contracts after about a year, and so that was a big part of, hop contracts have changed a lot in the last 3 years, even to where, when we opened, getting Citra was near impossible on spot, and even getting a contract was tough. Now it's obviously changed a little bit just because we've seen a lot of open closures and some just changes to volume and things. But I think what we learned is that what I didn't want to do is I didn't want us to be beholden to what we contract. So it was this give and take. We needed the hops on contract to guarantee we could make enough juicy bits or whatever to keep up the demand. But I also didn't want to go into a new year saying, okay, we don't have room for new experimental varietals like Lotus because we're so contracted, so heavy on Citra, and we need to make every beer have, every beer we make needs to have Citra in it. So it's a give and take. We can't go 100% just like whatever we want to make. We can just, whatever's on the list we can buy. But so there's some logistical constraints there. But I think we've done a really good job. Arnie, in particular, our director of brewing operations, he's managing all of our hop contracts now, and he and I are always looking at what's coming out, new experimental varietals, what's taking off, and so we try to stay in that 70% range. So we try to contract about 70% of our volume, and leaving that 20 to 30% left for whatever comes out. We don't, Lotus a year ago, we had just started, it just got a name, and so we didn't have the opportunity to contract it until 12 months ago. And now it's become one of my favorite hops, and one that we'll talk about in a minute. But without if we were already shored up on our contracts and we were already kind of stuck into that, okay, we've got everything we need for the next 12 months, there's not room to bring on new varietals.
Totally. Thank you. So let's dig into something a little extra fun here. Froot Camp, Pine, Orange, Banana is up next. As some of you, most of you, many of you may know, Froot Camp is a newer series and a new thing for us. Hyper fruited kettle soured wheat ale that we are in which we're trying to push the limits of what fruit flavor in the context of a beer can be. And Neil, I'd love you to go through some a little bit, but there was I thought a good, a tough but fair question from our friend Seth Cardinal about this beer, and I think it's good to look at not just from the perspective of this beer, but also from the perspective of why we do what we do, why we make the choices that we do when it comes to putting out certain beers and whatnot. So the question was, what was the inspiration for the Froot Camp series? Was it financially driven or otherwise? Which is a totally fair question. It's a popular thing these days to, as we have seen. You got your 450 Norths, and you got your Burley Oaks, and these folks who have been just shoving chockfuls of fruit, starting, obviously all the way back with the Answer. They're kind of they're ticking time bomb crawlers that they had back in the day. So it's not like we're completely reinventing the wheel here, but why do it? Why now? Was there any sense of, all right, well, this is a trend we have to get on board with, or what kind of laid behind the philosophy behind even bringing it to market?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you mentioned, the Answer and the Veil in particular, those two, I think, were some of the first we had, maybe, was it 2 years ago now? And they were there. I mean, we had tried beers from both of them that were just, it was insane. It was like, there's no way we can get that much fruit into a beer and still package it with everything we had at the time. And we loved them. So I would say the first part of that answer is it was not financially motivated to bring this style to WeldWerks. I think it was just this really fun expression that's so different. It's not even, we don't liken it to anything, whether it's our kettle sours or obviously nothing close to our mixed culture stuff, which, both of those we've done beers in the 4 to 5 pounds per gallon range, whether it's peach climacteric, which I brought my glass out for. This beer is nothing like that beer. So it's definitely more of a, how much fruit expression can you get into the glass? That's really what Froot Camp is. And you know, the question of, is it really beer? It's like the real answer is no. It's nothing like what we would call beer a year or two ago, but it's still beer by definition, by law. It's still made at a brewery, and it still has a lot in common with other approaches, like Jake mentioned, that we take to every style. It's, you know, we've heard these same kind of discussions. It's almost like the same argument again about hazy IPA. Is it even IPA? And it took a while for those to kind of fade. So is it going to be everyone's favorite? No. I understand that. It's sweet, and it's, you know, it's definitely just like alcoholic fruit smoothie. But I think what we wanted to do was show that there can be something masterful about the way it's made. And I think that's where Froot Camp was born, was this idea that we had done the Brambleberry in 2018, I believe. Maybe it was, 2018. So a year and a half ago, we had introduced our only version of the exploding can. I don't know that I don't think, Jake, you probably know, did we get any exploding can messages? I don't think we did. 0. Okay. That was just by luck. We didn't do anything to prevent that. We just got lucky. And there's been ongoing debates about the safety of that, and everyone makes those decisions for their own business. For us internally, we talked about it, and we loved that beer. That beer is still one of my favorites we've made. And we got lucky that the cans didn't explode, but with frequency, we knew that we had to have something more stable and safer. And we're getting to be a bigger brewery that we just can't afford to put, whether it's on the shelf or out of our tap room. We can't put a product out right now that it could be dangerous, or even not dangerous, but it just could totally transform in the can. We want the beer to be presented to you in the way that we want it to be expressed. And we couldn't do that until the fall of 2019. So 6 months ago at GABF, and this might be the first time we've talked about it publicly, but not, you know, we've talked about it at other places. We commissioned a pasteurizer. So we bought a not very cheap flash pasteurizer. As I mentioned, we had issues with stability on Medianoche in the past, and as that program grew as well, we knew that could not ever happen again. We've staked a lot of our reputation. We've built a lot of our brand around quality, around we knew those things were going to happen as we continue to push the envelope with adjuncts, with just the way that we operate. We are not afraid to take chances, but it became a point where coconut in particular, we wanted to make more coconut beer, but we couldn't safely without a pasteurizer. So we commissioned the pasteurizer before GABF. So since that, all of our barrel-aged beers have been pasteurized. And to be honest, the best ones we produce in the entire time we've been open have been produced using that pasteurizer. So Starry Noche, Brewer Select, before that, Coffee Maple, De Los Muertos, some of those beers that we could not feasibly pull off without a pasteurizer. That's why we bought the pasteurizer. But just like our team does with everything else, as soon as an opportunity presents itself, how can we continue to innovate? We have this piece of equipment. What else can we do with it? And this kind of fruit smoothie beer style came back to us, and we were like, you know, I think we can safely pull off what we wanted to do with Brambleberry, and we don't have to worry about exploding cans. It doesn't mean it's not without its challenges. We've dumped a lot of Froot Camp unintentionally because we've had either problems canning it or pasteurizing it. We're still learning. Friday was a rough day for our packaging team. They persevered as long as they could, but we have our next version that has not gone well yet. We'll see what happens tomorrow. And that's the nature of this beer. So it's a really, really difficult beer, even with the pasteurizer, to manage the logistics, what happens. We basically make a huge 10 to 12% kettle sour, unfruited, so we don't use any fruit. And then when it's all fermented and it's done, we dilute it with fruit. So we dilute it down to whatever our target ABV is, and that's a little bit of how we can get around there's a lot of questions on getting your ABVs right. If we start really high, we know we add 7, 8, 9, 10 drums of fruit, which it's insane to see how much fruit we add. So you take a beer and almost double its volume with fruit, and then you cut the alcohol in half, and that's what we package. So we run that through the pasteurizer as soon as the fruit's added. So fruit's added, mixed, runs through the pasteurizer to our bright tank right before packaging, and it goes in the cans. And that's Froot Camp. So this latest one, the pineapple orange banana, if you guys all have it, was really that dull pineapple orange banana juice that all of us drank. After school, whatever you could steal, it was like this cheating when you were drinking orange juice. That was way too good for orange juice, and we thought that would be a really fun beer to recreate in Froot Camp. So that's Bob.
I don't think we have to go through tasting notes on pine orange banana, because it's a pine orange banana beer. It's just nothing real in depth about it. We can just kind of let that go. There were, however, a couple other questions that I think are worth talking about. One of them I could speak to. What's the distribution scheme right now with Froot Camp? There isn't. There just ain't. And that's not because we don't want to. It's just that it sells with such ferocity within our own four walls that we don't have enough to reliably send out to our accounts in a way that wouldn't be annoying to some and not to others. And if anytime that anything sells through that quickly on site, we're just going to keep it on site. Oh, thanks. This is my little boy. He decided to just give me a sword. This is Milo. Here's my sword.
Hi, Milo.
Cool. Hey, I got to finish up this talk and then we can play sword stuff. Okay. Cool. Awesome. We're going to after this. Woo! Sword stuff. Let's see here. What is it? Oh, fresh.
I'll jump on the distro. I'll jump on the distro too to add on. The other challenge we have is that as you guys have poured it, you can tell there's very little to no carbonation on this beer, and that's on purpose because we trialed a lot of batches with higher carb. We're actually moving away, so we're bringing the carbonation down further and further because one, it presents some challenges when we're filling, but two, it kind of distracts from that fruit juice. Like we're really just trying to make this absurdly silly and fun and delicious alcoholic, fruit juice, fruit smoothie. And the lack of carbonation is, for a lot of people buying it on shelf, when we did distro, I think it was Tropical Infinity maybe, we got a lot of questions, comments, emails about either squishy cans or cans that had, like I poured it and there was no carb. And it's a lot harder to communicate kind of the nuance of this beer and this style to anyone just buying it on the shelf at any liquor store in the state. There's a lot more of that kind of nuance that needs to go into it. So when we can, when people buy Froot Camp at the brewery, we haven't had anybody say like, hey, it's flat. I didn't know what I was getting. I think everyone knows what they're getting, especially the price point. I would hope that that there's a lot of fruit. I don't think we've anybody since then, but some people did complain about how much fruit was in it. Now I think they understand like that's the purpose of the beer. So
totally. The question about fresh fruit or puree from Patrick. It's fresh fruit puree, or rather unfrozen fruit puree at that point. And I want to stress to you guys, like, when Neil says drum, like you remember that old like dystopian 80s movie where like the guys were in the back lot and they had a fire in this big metal tin thing that they were kind of warming themselves over. That's about like 4 foot, 3.5 foot tall, about like yay big around. Like we're talking 8 of those. I mean, hundreds of pounds.
The last one had 9.
9 times.
4,600 pounds of puree, or 55 gallons a piece. It's silly fun.
You know what? And I actually have a question for you myself that I've been getting from other people that I don't think I've had the proper answer for. There's a legal limit to which fruit can be put into it, the percent amount of fermentables, and still be called beer, correct?
Correct. It's got to be 51% of the fermentables have to be malt derived. So
what happens when you go over that? If we went over that, if we switched it and did like 49 and 51, what would that be called? Is that just a malt beverage at that point with the shit ton of fruit? What is the definition of that if we switch those two percentages by a couple ticks?
It fall under the cider wine license, cider wine mead. So anybody with a cider wine mead license, that's where the more than 51%. So they can still use barley, but that's the distinction point. So we have to use 51% of our fermentables. we dilute it down to where the content of the beer is still more than 51%. But that's kind of a gray area too, because we could technically use way more fruit because we're not fermenting any of it. So the fermentables are still 100% derived. We're just using fruit as our dilution. So it's a different kind of, just because we used to have that question is how much fruit could we ferment and still get away and still legally produce and package as a beer. And that was 51%. We had gotten pretty close to that a few times with some other beers, but this is obviously the other benefit is we can use this much fruit and it stays in the flavor and expression. You don't ferment a lot of that out.
Awesome. Let's move quickly. This journey has taken a little bit longer than I think we were initially anticipating. If everyone's still okay to keep going, we're going to keep rocking here. What I'd love to do is talk about the specifics of advanced fluid dynamics, and then maybe try and move into some of those questions, Neil, if you have a little bit of extra overtime of that, and if everyone else would indulge us that extra time. But let's get rocking on advanced fluid dynamics. For us, I can tell you that it's one of the beers that we are not just excited about, but find it to be one of the coolest beers that we made on the IPA side in quite a while. That's why we're interested in having more people try it. And there's some very specific reasons for that. So Neil, if you want to talk a bit more about this kind of dives into that hop thing. Lotus, bro, what the heck are these? Used to have this holy triumvirate. And there's even that journey from all the C's, right? Like way back, your Cascades, your Centennials, your all that, and then moving into the Galaxy and the Nelson, and etc. And now this new kind of class of hop coming out. So why are you excited about this beer? What and more than anything else, the other three beers, they make obvious sense the minute that you see them in this 4-pack. Like, yeah, Stephen Powell's, I made this beer with him. Juicy Bits, it's part of our history. Froot Camp, it's weird as fuck. Advanced fluid dynamics, why include this beer on everything else you could have in this 4-pack for everybody?
I think it's a lot of it's a new territory for us, like you mentioned. It's something that we're pushing a lot of energy towards and a lot of momentum behind. But it's kind of it's for me, it's the Juicy Bits of 2019, 2020. It's this kind of taking all these really new, really contemporary, and really different hops and finding the way that they can work well together in another beer that could become flagship or more, brew with more frequency. Could be a new silo where we bring in other hops. But the base of this, that Sabro Lotus combo, is unlike any other combo we've ever experimented with. We've done a lot of experimentation with hops before they had names, with all the numbers, with other varietals. We brought in some, like you said, some of the older classics, some Columbus especially, seeing how that plays in the New England realm. And this was the first time that I think we landed on something that was, these two in particular. We love Lotus. We really love Sabro. We've done a lot of them in either DDH versions or in their own beers separately. But when we combine these two varietals, we got something totally unique, totally different, and really, really like fun and flavorful and expressive. That's different than what we normally do. Lotus, back when it was 6297, was one of my favorites that we had ever experimented with. It was this orange creamsicle. It had these awesome vanilla notes in the background, but was really bright, sweet citrus. It reminded me of like a Citra with this really fun kind of lactone character that I can only describe as vanillin. And we don't get that in a lot of hops, really. And that's also true for Sabro with the coconut and kind of this tropical fruit. We've heard the opposite, or some of the detriment of Sabro is that cedary, musty character, which we don't ever get when we experiment with Sabro, because we keep it mostly all on the dry hop side. I think any beer I've had that's really cedary, musty, kind of woody from Sabro is that the expression is so kind of earthy, woody, and not fruit forward. And then you put it in the dry hop and you get this amazing bright tropical coconut. And so that's these two together are so tropical and expressive. And then we designed the malt around that. We wanted something, we did the regular fluid dynamics, which is kind of the single IPA version. I think it's a little bit like what Stephen mentioned. Sometimes you find that the bigger alcohol, the bigger body, the bigger beer just expresses a little bit more of what you're looking for from those hops. I think what we found, I love fluid dynamics, but when we brewed advanced, I think we all kind of turned our heads like, wow, that is the combo. That's what we needed. That's what we were missing. Enough kind of beer behind it to where it held up to all of this. And so when we brought this one back, we talked about doing fluid dynamics. I'm sure we will bring that back. But for me, this kind of playground for these two varietals is perfect. And we designed that with intentionality with those two specific varietals. I hope that we can continue to use both of them in other beers, but it's really fun. This is kind of that baseline. So this will be that Juicy Bits that you get to know and love. And then we start playing and riffing on a DDH version with a different varietal or something along those lines down the road.
That's an interesting point to bring in. Two different questions. I'm kind of unsure which one to go with first. Let's go with the one that was asked kind of in the live chat here. So a criticism of WeldWerks that I hear a lot is that all of your great IPAs are based off of the Juicy Bits recipe. You know, and there is this sense of you know, we release so many beers in the context of a year, right? I mean, hey, Milo Thomas, can you not play the drums right now? My kid's playing the drums right now, guys. That's what's happening right now. You release so many beers in the context of a year, and with some of them being hazies, there is this sense that like, well, okay, so you just like swapped one hop out for like the regular Juicy Bits thing. Like what are you really doing here? And so, you know, what is the philosophy for you guys behind kind of creating these new hop varieties and combos, and why?
I think it depends on what we're trying to do. I think, you know, a lot of our IPAs have a similar malt profile. They all use the same yeast. So that's a given. We're using 1318 London Ale 3 on every IPA we produce other than Steam Barrel. So that's a given, but even the malt, you know, we have two silos, so it's not hard to guess which malt base we're using, either Pilsner or our pale malt. So one of those two, if not a combination of the two, is going to go in the base. But what's fun about even new recipes like Advanced Fluid is we can change up, you know, we're not beholden to Juicy Bits. So if things from the Juicy Bits recipe work, great. But we also look at, okay, can we use maybe wheat in a higher proportion because we want a different mouthfeel for this beer than we do with Juicy Bits, which Juicy Bits uses a lot of wheat, but it also uses a lot of oats. And so with some of these beers, we're changing some of those supporting malts. Sometimes we're changing the base entirely. So Juicy Bits is 50-50 Pils and Pale. A lot of our other beers are 100% Pale or 100% Pils for the base. Sometimes we'll try 70-30 or 75-25. It's really dependent upon what we're trying to express, whether from just the hops and also the mouthfeel, the malt character, and really the drinkability too. So we have so many different variables that we tweak and change for each recipe, but we're not reinventing the wheel. We're also, you know, that's the other part of it. We've also found some winning combinations and formulas and recipes that to start from scratch for every single beer would mean we have more hit misses than hits. And so we do borrow a lot from Juicy Bits because we have a lot of repetition. We can get really good results and data from that beer. So I won't lie and say that every single beer is brand new from the ground up. But when we do put a new label on, it's quite a bit different than what the base is, whether it's a whole different combo of dry hopping, dry hop schedules adjusted. We do a lot of fun things where we change the whirlpool schedule and additions and all those things. So every time we brew something new and bring back even something we've done before, it's always a new chance to say, hey, what can we do to make this beer better? The few things that stay the same, like I said, yeast, and then our water chemistry is pretty similar across the board. We don't mess with that too much just because we found it's a really good for both mouthfeel and also for our maintaining haze stability, all that stuff. So.
Awesome. Real quick question I want to answer that just came up briefly before we move to some of the ones that were submitted by folks when they signed up. Rebecca asks, do you brew pilot batches for new brews, or do you just go all in on a large scale? We don't have a pilot system anymore. It doesn't exist at the brewery. So we just decided that we're just going to go for it whenever we're going to try something. And it was a bit harrowing, I think, maybe more back a couple years ago than it is now. But 15 barrels is the smallest batch that we make. And that, the cool thing about, and Neil, if you want to chime in on this in any different fashion, please feel free. But the cool thing about making 100, 120 beers over the course of a year is that you're not just doing it for like, oh, this seems like a really fun idea. It's a shit ton of work, and it is like our brew house crew. I mean, between scheduling and recipe creation and procuring the right ingredients and all of the work that goes into doing stuff like that, it is an unbelievable task to try and release that many brews. Not just because a lot of people will brew that many over the course of the year, but to package them, to brand them, and to release them out into distribution is a massive undertaking. But what you get along that process is you learn how, especially within the context of your own system, how the different knobs and dials work as far as flavor profiles, what you do with the water, what you do with the yeast, what you do with the malt and the hops and everything, and the way that all works together. So every single brew is a way of learning. So I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of always got the impression that eventually it's like, well, fuck it, let's pull the training wheels off. And if we're going to make a beer, let's make a beer. Let's see how it goes. Fingers crossed. Woo! And thankfully it's worked out, but it wasn't this just like, I don't know, let's just throw whatever we think might be kind of cool into this beer. It was this massive process of iteration and improvement. That's why we use the term fine-tuned. I mean, that's not pithy. We're not trying to have some neat little marketing catchphrase. The purpose of saying that is literally every time we brew, we learn something about that beer or that style or what we did with that process and how it affected the end product. So I don't know if you have anything to say to that at all, Neil, either.
No, I mean, yeah, I think that's exactly, we have, I mean, unequivocally, we're making better beer. Juicy Bits is better drinking this batch than it's ever been. Everything is getting better, and that's that fine tuning, is that we have years of experience now. We've got better equipment. We've got a better team. If I was still only person brewing, our beers would not be as good as they are now. We've got immensely more talented people in every team at the brewery than myself or Colin. And that's, I think, why we've grown, why we've been successful, is that I think both of us, I would say that the thing we're best at is getting out of the way and finding the best, most talented people like Jake, like Arnie, like everyone we have at our teams that have made us better, but they're taking beers like Juicy Bits that we were talking about this on Thursday and asking, things are very similar to when we very first designed this recipe. There's a lot of things we've improved, but there's some things, and I told our team, like, if we ever have a way to make this beer better, there's nothing that is like, you have to be beholden to this because Neil did it this way or someone else did it this way. We are always looking at ways to improve, and that means scrapping what we've done in the past because it was outdated or was antiquated or it wasn't even the most effective way to use hops, and we should do that. And so now we have people that have more experience, more talent, more knowledge, and they can bring that and make every single one of our beers the best they can be.
Super relevant question following up. Oh, sorry, I don't know if that's me. Okay, let's try that again. From Patrick, when was the last time you dumped a batch of beer? Two answers for that. One might be Monday, unfortunately, which would
rest in peace, Froot Camp.
Yeah, that the upcoming batch of Froot Camp might not make it, guys. That's we'll see. There was just some difficulties in the process, so we'll see if it makes it out. You'll find out if next week there's a Froot Camp released. If not, RIP. The one before that, correct me if I'm wrong, Neil, but I believe the last one that we significantly had to just like bid adieu to was Cherry Vanilla Milkshake, which was an abomination of liquid. I can't describe, like, you guys remember Luden's cough drops? Take a Luden's cough drop, drop it into a vat of acid, not the good kind, and shake it up for a little bit. Few dashes of vanilla, and I don't know, just like what's the some butyric, tuck some butyric in there, and take every bad dream that you've ever had and put that into the blender as well, shake it up, and then drink it, and that's what it tasted like. So we decided to not release that one after we
canned it.
After we canned it. Oh,
like 200 cases or something.
I still have nightmares about that shit.
I think there's still cans hiding in the brewery, so every once in a while we open one just to see how it's doing. But that actually answers, I think, one of the questions you had highlighted. I'll pull it up. It was toughest decision we had to make before we became established, and that was dumping beer. I think was especially that first 12 months. Gosh, we dumped. I have to look back at the log, but at least 10 batches, so 150 barrels out of a year that we produced less than it's like 300 or 350 barrels, less than 500. I think packaged and sold was like 375 to 400. So a good quarter of the beer we produced that year, and that was just learning. I think it was. Well, we didn't know what we were doing. We still don't in a lot of ways, but that's great because we get to do things that we shouldn't do, like try and put 8 drums of fruit into 15 barrels of beer. Those are the hardest decisions because financially it was everything we dumped was how much longer can we do that? But we knew that's how we could make our name, was to put out products that only reflected the quality that the standards we held for ourselves. So we didn't, not to say we didn't put out beer that people didn't like, but it wasn't ever a beer we put out that we weren't proud of, or we didn't execute well. It was stylistically, this was well executed, and if it didn't hit that mark, we dumped it. So I'm glad we're not dumping beer, but we're also not afraid to anymore. We're just better at brewing. We're better at executing crazy ideas, and we're still just as quick to dump, though. If anything happens, even the canned beer, we should have dumped that. That's on probably me. It's that resistance. You're always hoping that beer can come around and put it in cans, and you still wait and you still hope. And we could have, if we cut our losses earlier, that was a good lesson on the cherry. It was, we should have cut, if we had dumped it before we even got the fruit in, there were enough problems on the way. We should have dumped it then we should have dumped it after the fruit. We should have dumped it before we canned it, and we should have just dumped those cans right as soon as they were packaged. But we sat on them for a while, and they took up space, and then we kept, I think I told Jake I thought he was coming around, and it never got better. So.
Well, part of that, I want to make sure that everyone understands it. The biggest consideration when doing that, I mean, you're talking, especially once it's canned, you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, not just lost based off of what you put into it, but in lost revenue that would be coming off of selling those cans. And so the calculus at that point is, what type, it might I possibly damage the trust that our consumer has in us? Because when you put out 100 some beers in a year, we want you to be able to walk up to the cooler at your local liquor store and just be like, you know what? It looks weird. I don't really get it, but I don't know. I've never really had like shitty beer from them, so I'm gonna give it a shot. Let's do it. Woo! And then, to have that trust and that kind of that that we have your back, right? Like that we're not going to put something into the market that we think is dog shit, because we really care about that relationship and about that level of trust that we've spent years and years and years trying to establish. So at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, we could put it out there, but like, what kind of irreparable harm is that going to do? And that's the type of stuff that would keep, Neil and I and Colin and really the whole leadership team up at night. Just like, I don't want to have that on my shoulders. It's giving me a nightmare, man. Let's do a few quick hits, and then get to a couple of the live ones, and then call it. Are you good still, Neil?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. A few quick hits from the stuff that people submitted. Homeboy D George, he had to ask about your favorite whiskeys. I'm going to differentiate it between two. For all y'all who don't know, we probably drink more whiskey at the brewery now than we do beer, well, at home at least. Obviously, we're always loving and consuming our lovely product at work, but we've turned into big whiskey nerds. Neil, the chief whiskey nerd among us.
I don't know about that.
Oh, Nate, I'm sorry. Nate Chenzer probably can take that. Actually can take that. Scott Duncan, USOB. Man, I want to.
Scott, that was really, really thoughtful of you to buy that for us. Oh,
yeah,
man.
Thanks, Scott. You're a real sweetheart.
No, you are too kind. You are too kind, Scott.
What a guy. So 2 categories. 1, favorite daily sipper. 2, favorite whiskey of all time, if you could pick one up.
I think I'm only into daily sippers now. I think it's like beer. It's fun to hunt for bourbon, but it's tiring and it's stressful, and it's like I don't want to go chase bourbon anymore. So my daily sipper is my it's probably the same answer. It's Antique 107, which is still not super, like, it's not always on the shelf, but it's easily available enough and to trade and to pay, barely over retail for, that I can keep a well-stocked collection of it. So Antique, Weller Antique 107 would be if I had, 10 cases, that would probably not be enough for the rest of my life. So, but 1910 is like something that's mostly on the shelf, is probably my favorite shelf one. And then like limited, it's all, the BTAC collection, there's 1910. There it is. Good choice. Yeah. I love that bourbon a lot. Obviously we made the 1910 Medianoche and kind of homage to that. I love it because it's accessible, but it's got a good story. It's got a really fun, it's a unique bourbon. It's also not super, long age. So you're not having to, they can release more every year. They can kind of keep up with demand. So it's not going to become the Weller 12s and the Elmer T. Lee and even the McKenna's. And I'm so tired of my favorite shelf bourbons becoming, it's impossible to find. So I'm just going to love the ones that stay on the shelves for longer. But my favorite limited bourbon is probably that William LaRue Weller that Adam got us. Was it 2 years ago? Was that it was 18? Yeah, I think he got us. It was in 18. It was a 17 LaRue. That one was, it was one of the best bourbons I've ever had. So
I would say that the Van Winkle Reserve Rye that dear Al Karam brought up for us for the Invitational last year, that was way up there for me as well. That's just me. Kind of keeping along the favorite questions. This question, I can't wait to hear your answer because it changes like every week. What is your favorite?
Premier Volume 2.
Every time a new non-adjunct Medianoche comes out, Neil immediately declares it his favorite of all time. It doesn't matter what it is. It could just be like putting in a glass or something. And if it was called the non-adjunct Medianoche, he'd be like, nope, this is the best beer we've ever made. No question. 100%. It is the best. But is that true? Is that actually stand as your favorite Noche currently?
It's so hard. There would be a 4-way tie right now between 1910, Premier Volume 1, Premier Volume 2, and Old Fitz. So I do love the adjuncts. I don't. It's not like I avoid them, but the expression we've gotten a nose for in particular in the non-adjuncts. I put it up there with any of the non-adjunct barrel-aged stouts in the country because we've gotten, like I said, we've gotten better at everything, including barrel-aged stouts. So that Premier Volume 2 is drinking really good, and that's the most recent. So
just had mine last night, and man, made my tongue slap my face off. It was delightful. Keep it on the Noche train. This is something that we just have gone over and over and over and over again. It's a 2-part question from 2 different people, both Dave and Seth, as far as secondary stuff goes, right? So number 1, just in general, Dave asked what your general thoughts are on secondary markets for beer, Noche in particular. And then Seth kind of piggybacked on it. Do you believe when a beer gains lots of secondary value that it helps the reputation for high quality beer overall, and in turn helps overall sales? Like what's that push-pull for you when it comes to secondary?
I would say as far as the sales go, for us, it's never been a huge factor one way or another. Our Medianoche demand's been about the same. Some batches sell out faster or have a little bit more fervor, but we've sold all the volume we've made. So we're not stockpiling. Occasionally we'll have stuff that we allocate a certain amount and then release the rest later, or some of those that I'm trying to think of the most recent ones. Some of those we did at Christmas, but it doesn't really, for us, I think Jake and I have talked about it too, that I don't want to make any decisions based on secondary. It's not something that we're not dumb. We're not completely blind to it. But what I don't love about it is it seems to bring out the worst in our industry, in our community, in the sense that the kind of most vitriol responses we've ever had was when our secondary value on some of our Medianoche batches was the highest. And then obviously it also was timed when some of those went sour. So it was almost a self-correcting problem that once we had those issues with Reserve in particular, and then vanilla, Bama before that, but I don't think Bama had much of a secondary, but those three in particular we had really, and rightfully so, we screwed up, but I don't know that the response, I think the magnitude of people's frustrations or anger was necessarily in line with what they paid for the bottle versus what the bottle was valued at. And that's, for me, is where it became it was clear that this is not it's not necessarily about the actual beer, it's about the commodity value of it. And that it brings out a lot of things that we don't love. So our goal really is, we don't take an action against it. We're not engaged in the secondary value. We're not worried about what people do with the beer. That's not really, honestly, we don't have the time to really monitor it. But what we hope to do is curb kind of that really, really high scarcity model by just making more of it and making it more accessible and getting it out in different ways, because it's such a great beer. We want more people to experience it. And we're not trying to manipulate secondary value or anything like that. That being said, I do think there's sometimes like where, side projects, a great example. Everything they make is so hard to get and its secondary value is super high. If Corey would send me 3 cases a month, I would be able to put every kid at the brewery through college, not just my kids. So I'm going to ask him for that for the college fund, but it's the best barrel-aged stouts, that I've ever had. So I get some of that, but then, beyond that, there's others that it just doesn't line up. And I honestly, I don't know why anyone would want to pay more than a little bit more. I pay more for bourbon, but not 10 times the value. So I think it's just up to everyone else, but we take a pretty hands-off approach. Jake, I know you can interject too, because we've been talking about this recently.
Yeah, I think what you touched on is the part that kind of ultimately creates the largest problem, which is the commoditization, which at the end of the day, all it does is it serves to remove the, I don't know, like the innocence. It's just beer. We're just making liquid that we hope that you guys enjoy and that you want to drink with a friend or a loved one to celebrate something good happening, to mourn something bad happening, to when Friday night when it's 6 o'clock and the sun's starting to go down over the mountains and you look out and you're like, damn, that looks cool as hell. I should pop a really good beer that I want to enjoy right now. That's what the purpose of these beers are for. They're for sharing moments with other people that stick in the brain, right? You're creating moments. That's the point of a communal beverage like beer. It's always been that way. Beer's history is not about, sure, commerce is involved because you're buying and selling something, but the point of it is not to take what somebody made here and then find out how much more money you can get for it over here. I don't decry people that do that. Hey, free market, go nuts. That's awesome. But it's not why we make it. It's not even remotely close to why we ever even thought about making it. And, Neil was not in his garage doing his own barrel aging at that point. He's like, man, one day this shit's going to be worth hundreds of dollars, yo. Yeah. Like, no, man. Like, he was just super excited about the fact that he could make something that brought all of his friends over to his garage to hang out and brew and chat and high five and that type of thing, especially right now, is needed more than ever, right? And so, that's the purpose and the value of a good beverage, not what it can possibly procure you in addition beyond that. Again, we don't decry people who want to do that. You want to buy and sell and trade beer as making extra money on a side hustle, go for it. It's just not. We just don't really care about it, really.
And if here's some insider trading tips. If you're trying to stockpile Medianoche for secondary value, it's going to get curbed because we're going to, if that happens, we're just like, we see something skyrocket, we're going to make more of it. So don't do that because It's not going to go up in value. It's terrible investment. You should drink it, and the people that will drink it. So.
I think there's one more. We're close to half hour over. I don't want to pull people off too long, especially you, Neil. I know your time's valuable with your family as well. One question that kind of bleeds into something that might be generally interesting. It was, where'd they go? It was Eric asking, how long do you guys plan on keeping single can sales around? And if you wanted to kind of wrap that into, state of WeldWerks right now, right? So everybody's in a weird place. We have different processes and procedures in place that were not part of our normal everyday thing. A couple months ago, even 6 weeks ago, you can order stuff online. You can come pick it up. You can do this. You can do that. And this is a question that came up at our roundtable on Thursday. What including single can sales, what practices do you think are just going to be necessitated by folks like these, are valued consumers, because they've just grown accustomed to it, and also moving forward, which are just good business decisions. And we can't look 6 months down the road and say this is exactly what WeldWerks is going to look like, but just based off of everything that you're kind of seeing and feeling right now, how much of this stuff kind of sticks around, how much changes back to the way it was, so to speak?
I think everything it's same with legislation too. I think that questions come up at the Brewers Guild, is how long are these practices and these new kind of laws going to stay? And I think it's just we're evaluating it, but every single cans is a great example. It's feasible now because of the way that we're operating, the way that we're fulfilling orders, the kind of lead time we have. There's reasons we haven't done it in the past. It was just delaying our service. It would make it really hard to maintain that customer service focus in the tap room when you're having to break down 4-packs and do all that. So I think when we come back to when things like whether it's opening the tap room and kind of additional capacity and all these things, when they transition, we'll probably take all of those online orders, whatever we're doing now, and see, is there things that work really well even once we return to maybe more normal operations. I think that's the other, when will things return to normal? Jake and I, we've talked about this on several calls. The normal that was February and March, it's not coming back. So there'll be a new normal, and the things will be, we have really no idea what that looks like yet. But I think we want to strive for as much customer engagement, as much customer convenience, as much as we can do to make your experience better, whether it's in the tap room or buying beer to go. We'll keep everything that we can that still, makes it as positive an experience as possible. I think that's what we've learned from this, is that there's some things that we should have just, we talked about online ordering. It took us a day and a half to get it implemented, and we talked about it for a year. And so it was, we were obviously prepared and ready for it, but those kinds of things I think will stick around. It'd be hard to imagine a world where you couldn't order beer online from WeldWerks. Not to say for sure, but those are things that we've all now in 6 weeks figured out how to, we figured out a way to engage everyone in a different way, and a convenient way, and a safe way, that it'll take a long time before that erodes or goes away, if it ever does. So.
We'll call it there. Two quick things. Well, one, sorry, Seth did chime in a question about the 2020 WeldWerks Invitational. That is still very much TBD. We're keeping our eyes on everything as close as we can. Obviously, we hope that everyone sees that we've tried to be on the forefront of making sure that both our staff and our consumers are as safe as is absolutely possible at every given point, and we will continue that practice. No one knows what the next few months look like, and October is a long ways away. So we're going to try and continue to be the industry leaders as best as we can when it comes to kind of addressing those issues of postponement or cancellation, etc. So just kind of stay tuned on that. We'll probably look at that in another couple months once things kind of suss themselves out a little bit more. One small kind of Easter egg for folks who maybe weren't on the call with Skip a little while ago, we do have 2 new Media Noches coming out sooner than later. We've got the 2020 base Media Noche that is already
my favorite,
bottled, right?
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Bottled. And then the return of Coconut Media Noche in perhaps its most badass form ever. I'm not using hyperbole when I say that there are actually over 100 pounds of coconut per cask in this beer. It's definitely one of the we're more proud of it than we're just super proud of it. We're really happy about how it's come along and where it's going to end up. We're going to be doing that release 2 different ways, both via Tavour and also in-house as well. So we're still working some of those details, and we'll obviously share those as we move on. But again, folks, thank you so much. We appreciate you guys dialing in and hanging out and having a good time. We appreciate you even for staying a half an hour over on a precious Sunday like this. So Neil, any closing words for the beautiful people?
No, I was just going to make sure we didn't miss any major questions. So thank you guys so much for joining us today, and thanks for picking up those 4-packs. Hopefully you guys enjoy 1 or 2 of them today, maybe another one later. I wish we could reseal cans, but I've got a lot of leftover beer. So that might be the most beer I dump this week. I hope so. Fingers crossed for tomorrow.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, friends, and we'll catch you guys in the next session. Cheers.
Cheers.